What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
Every year, like clockwork, right around the first week of December, I'd open my mailbox and brace myself. Not because of the electric bill or another medical brochure reminding me I'm not getting any younger, but because of the envelope, the glossy, cream-colored one with the embossed lettering and festive gold trim. The one that always said the Pierces in curly red font across the front. Every damn year, they send out their Christmas card like it was some kind of sacred ritual, like a holy proclamation of their perfect suburban kingdom, complete with matching scarves, hot chocolate mugs, and forced grins. And every year, I get to play a fun little game called Find Maggie. Spoiler alert, I was never in the picture. Now, this wasn't just some cute little oversight. This wasn't forgetting to write Aunt Maggie under the group shot or forgetting to tag me on Facebook. This was a decade-long erasure, subtle and slow, like someone taking a whiteout pen to your existence, one year at a time, until even the smudges disappeared. It used to hurt in a sharp, direct kind of way, like stepping on a piece of glass. But over time, it dulled into something deeper, a constant ache behind the ribs, like when you've held your breath too long and the air just won't come. I'm Maggie Pierce. I'm 52, never married, no kids, and if you ask my brother Paul or his perfect step-forward wife Heather, not much to write home about. I taught English at a high school for 26 years before I got laid off and started freelance editing, which basically means I fix other people's grammar from the quiet shame of my one-bedroom apartment while pretending I don't hear my neighbors fighting about whose turn it is to take out the trash. I send birthday cards. I show up to weddings with thoughtful gifts. I bake cookies for Thanksgiving and overtip waitstaff because that's how Mom raised me. But somehow, somewhere along the way, maybe right after Mom died, now that I think about it, I stopped being part of the family and started being something else. An obligation? A nuisance? A ghost? The first year after Mom passed, the Christmas card came and I thought maybe it was just a mistake. The photo was taken at a cabin in Boone, the same weekend they'd invited me, but I couldn't come because of a school event I'd committed to months prior. It stung, sure, but I told myself it was just bad timing. The next year, same thing, another group shot, this time from Myrtle Beach, with Paul, Heather, their 3 kids, cousin Rachel and her husband, and even Uncle Glenn, who's got one working lung and a portable oxygen tank, and yet, somehow, no one thought to invite me. By the 3rd year, it stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like a decision. Still, I kept playing along. I sent holiday emails. I mailed gifts to the kids. I even commented under the group photo one year with something like, "Looks like fun. Missed being there." And Paul replied with a thumbs up emoji. A thumbs up. That's what my existence was worth, a pixelated thumb from a man I used to sneak Christmas cookies with under the table while our parents argued over cranberry sauce. One year, I actually got a card with a handwritten note inside from Heather that read, "We didn't have room to fit everyone, but you're in our hearts." I laughed when I read it, not because it was funny, but because I genuinely couldn't believe the audacity. No room? It was a goddamn digital photo collage. They had the dog in there, twice. But this year they didn't even send it. No email. No envelope. No accidental reply all. Nothing. I only found out the card existed when I saw it on Instagram, a perfectly filtered shot with everyone in matching flannel, standing in front of a Christmas tree that looked like it was pulled straight out of a Pottery Barn catalog. Heather even captioned it, "Pierce family, grateful. Together. Blessed." And as I stared at it, blinking hard to keep the bitterness from spilling over, I noticed something new. They had added someone, Rachel's new boyfriend, Dan. He'd been to 2 family dinners. 2. Meanwhile, I'd been in the family for 5 decades and had become about as relevant as the wrapping paper that gets thrown out before dessert. At that moment, I felt something shift. It wasn't sadness, not really. Sadness had been there for years. This was something colder. Something sharper. A decision, maybe. A reckoning. Because for the first time, I stopped asking why they left me out and started asking what if I stopped pretending I cared? What if I didn't just disappear quietly this time? What if, instead of shrinking myself down to fit their world, I made myself so large, so loud, so impossible to ignore that they'd choke on their own smug little Christmas toast? I'll tell you when the idea came to me, not all at once, not like a lightning bolt, more like a slow burn that started behind my sternum and crawled its way up to my brain over a week or so. I was in line at the grocery store, thumbing through one of those small-town newspapers, the kind with church potlucks and lost cats and retirement announcements that take up an entire page, and I saw it. A full-page ad congratulating someone on 40 years of service at a local plumbing company. There it was, a big picture, bold letters, a whole damn page about one man and a wrench. And I thought, that's one way to get noticed. I laughed quietly. Then I folded the paper, tucked it under my arm, and walked out of the store with my groceries and a dangerous little seed of an idea. It wasn't about revenge, not yet anyway. It was about visibility. About being seen. About reminding them, all of them, that I wasn't just some shadow fading into the background, or an old aunt they could forget like a coffee mug left in the back of a cupboard. No, I was real. I was still here. And if they weren't going to put me in their perfect little holiday narrative, then maybe it was time I wrote my own. And oh, believe me, I was going to write it loud. The week after Christmas always feels like some sort of emotional hangover, especially when you've spent the holiday alone, not by choice, but because the people who are supposed to love you decided, with quiet finality, that you no longer quite fit into the picture they want the world to see. I spent that first day back at my desk trying to pretend that editing a brochure about assisted living facilities in Florida could somehow distract me from the growing sense of unease bubbling under my skin. But every sentence I read turned into a twisted metaphor for abandonment, independent, but connected, always welcome, never alone, designed for comfort and dignity, and by the third page, I had to shut my laptop and admit to myself that something inside me had cracked. The thing is, it wasn't just about the card or the absence of it. That was just the sharp edge that finally broke through years of doled-out disappointment. It was about the steady unraveling of connections that were supposed to be permanent, the slow, sneaky kind of exclusion that doesn't scream or slam doors, but rather just stops knocking. I kept asking myself over and over in a voice that sounded too much like the one I used when I taught struggling teenagers how to write personal essays. What is the inciting incident? What was the moment when everything began to shift? And the more I asked, the less sure I became. I remember standing at the kitchen sink with a dirty mug in my hand, the sky outside already bruising into that heavy winter dusk, and saying aloud, to no one in particular, did I do something wrong? And it wasn't performative, it wasn't rhetorical. I genuinely couldn't tell anymore if I had misstepped so badly, somewhere along the timeline of our family's life, that I deserved this quiet exile. I started going back through old texts, which, by the way, were fewer and further between than I remembered. I scrolled through birthdays and holidays, looking for some evidence of offense. Did I say something snide last Thanksgiving? Did I forget to reply to someone's baby announcement? Was I too political in that one family Zoom call during lockdown? I even opened the folder on my laptop labeled Family Stuff, where I kept every digital Christmas card from the past 15 years, thinking maybe, just maybe, the pattern had always been there and I'd just been too naive or too desperate to notice. And let me tell you, there's something deeply unsettling about watching your own erasure unfold in high-resolution photos. I could track the shift almost mathematically. In 2013, I was still in the center, standing next to Mom with my hand on her shoulder. By 2015, I was off to the side, barely in frame, holding someone else's child I don't even talk to anymore. By 2017, I was gone completely, and no one ever mentioned why. I think part of me always assumed it was unintentional, some oversight, like maybe they'd accidentally cropped me out or just didn't have a good photo with everyone. But looking back now, it's impossible to miss. I wasn't forgotten. I was edited out. I tried calling Paul, just to hear his voice, just to see if I was imagining the distance, but it went to voicemail after 3 rings, and he never called back. I tried Heather too, even though I knew it would go nowhere, and it didn't. I left a perfectly polite message, no accusations, no drama, just a soft, hey, hope you all had a lovely Christmas. Just checking in. Let's catch up soon. I waited 3 days. Nothing. That silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had, more final than any slammed door. It felt like the kind of silence you use when you've already made up your mind. I talked to my friend Ava about it over coffee. She's one of the few people in my life who doesn't sugarcoat things. She's the kind of woman who will tell you your haircut makes you look like a weatherman from the 80s if it's true, but also who will sit with you in a parking lot for an hour when you can't go back into your house because the emptiness is just too loud. I told her everything: the missing card, the unanswered calls, the years of slowly being pushed out of the frame, and when I finally stopped rambling, she leaned back in her chair, took a long sip of her tea, and said, "Maggie, sometimes families don't exile you because of what you did. They exile you because of what you are. You're the reminder that their version of perfect doesn't include honesty or reality." That hit me harder than I expected, probably because deep down I already knew it. I wasn't the messy one. I wasn't the unstable one. But I was the only one who still talked about Mom's last weeks honestly, who didn't pretend she died smiling with closure and grace. I was the only one who said, out loud, that our family started to fracture long before the cancer came. Maybe that made me inconvenient. Maybe that made me disposable. And then came the next punch. On New Year's Day, as I sat on my porch watching the neighborhood kids set off cheap leftover fireworks, I got a notification on my phone. It was from my niece Emily, the one I used to babysit every Friday night when Paul and Heather still lived 2 blocks away, the one I took to her first PG-13 movie without telling her parents. She had posted an engagement photo. Not just any photo, but a full album. Her fiancé, a perfectly symmetrical dentist named Bryce, had proposed in Colorado. Everyone had flown out to surprise her. Everyone, including people I hadn't seen in years. There were over 20 family members in that photo. I wasn't one of them. No invite. No heads up. Not even a "wish you were here" text. And in that moment, sitting there with the cold air pressing into my collarbones and a glass of wine I hadn't really wanted, I felt something inside me settle, not in a good way, not in a peaceful way, but in that dangerous way. The way something heavy sinks when it realizes it's done floating. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. And if they wanted a version of the family that didn't include me, then maybe, just maybe, it was time I gave them exactly that. Just not in the way they expected. The thing about silence, real, deliberate silence, is that after a while, it doesn't just feel like the absence of sound. It starts to sound like something on its own. Like a low hum in your chest that you can't turn off, the kind that fills your thoughts at night when the dishes are done, and the TV is off, and you're staring at the ceiling pretending you're not waiting for someone to remember you exist. In the weeks after the new year, I started waking up earlier and earlier, not because I had things to do or deadlines to meet. Lord knows the freelance editing world slows to a crawl in January, but because there was something gnawing at me. Something that didn't let me rest, some part of me that refused to accept that I had been so easily discarded without a word, without a conversation, without even the decency of a fight. It was during one of those early mornings, with the weak winter sun just beginning to spill through the blinds, that the thought began to take shape, not as a vengeful impulse or some kind of theatrical tantrum, but as a simple, cold realization. If they could rewrite the narrative to exclude me, then surely I had the right to write one of my own. I didn't need to shout or scream or show up uninvited to make a scene. All I needed was to remind them, and maybe the rest of the town too, that I had not disappeared, that I had not gone quietly into some shadowed corner like a forgotten ornament in the attic. I was still here. I was still part of the damn picture, whether they liked it or not. I remembered a particular Sunday when I had been standing in line at the grocery store, one of those small-town markets with chipped linoleum tiles and a wire rack full of impulse items near the register, crossword books, chapsticks, batteries, and, always, a stack of local newspapers. It was a habit of mine to flip through them while I waited, more out of boredom than interest, but that morning, something had caught my eye, a full-page ad, bordered in gold, with a grainy photo of a man in a suit holding a wrench above the words, "Congratulations, Bill Travers, 40 years of service to Henderson Plumbing." There was something about the simplicity of it, the boldness, the unapologetic way it took up space, that planted a seed inside me. If a plumber could get a full page in the paper, then surely there was space in the world, even a small space, for a woman who had spent her entire adult life showing up for people who stopped seeing her. I didn't do anything that day. I didn't rush home or start scribbling in a notebook like some kind of deranged vigilante ant. But over the following days, I started turning the idea around in my mind, shaping it, refining it, trying to find that delicate balance between making a point and losing my dignity. I didn't want to hurt anyone, not really, but I did want them to feel it. I wanted them to open that paper on Christmas morning, coffee in hand and kids screaming about stockings in the background, and see my face staring back at them. I wanted the neighbors, the church ladies, the in-laws, and every last smug friend they'd shown their picture-perfect family cards to. I wanted them all to know that there was someone missing from that damn photo, and that it wasn't an accident. Ava, bless her cynical heart, was the first person I told, and to her credit, she didn't try to talk me out of it. She simply raised one eyebrow, took a slow sip of her coffee, and said, "All right. But if you're gonna do this, it's gotta be classy. Not some bitter manifesto. Something that makes them squirm in church, but not enough to call the police." And that was exactly the energy I was going for, not messy, not desperate, just undeniable. We spent an entire afternoon staging the photo, which turned out to be trickier than I thought. I didn't want it to look like a glamour shot, but I also didn't want to look like I had been crying in a Walgreens parking lot for 3 days. I wore a red sweater, the same one I had worn to Christmas dinner 3 years ago, the last one I was invited to, and held a neatly wrapped gift box on my lap. Ava took the photo in front of her fireplace, with just enough decoration in the background to give it a seasonal feel without being obvious. We tried a few different expressions. Smiling too big felt fake, not smiling at all looked bitter, and finally settled on something in between, a soft, confident smirk that said, "I know what you did, and I'm not sorry for still being here." And beneath the photo, in bold serif letters, I wrote the words that had been echoing in my mind since that moment in the grocery store. Turns out, I was the gift. I called the local paper the next day, the same one that had featured Bill from plumbing and his retirement wrench. The woman on the phone, her name was Nancy, I think, didn't ask many questions. I gave her the ad copy, paid in full, and scheduled it to run on December 20th of the following year. A whole year away, yes, but I wanted it on Christmas Day, in the edition that would land on every porch in town, in the same paper Paul and Heather subscribed to, the one Heather always left artfully open on the kitchen island during brunch. That gave me time. Time to wait. Time to see if they would reach out, apologize, extend some kind of olive branch. They didn't. And just when I thought they might finally break the silence, that maybe the card would show up late, or an email might ping into my inbox with some half-hearted excuse, I got the clearest answer I'd ever received. They sent out the card again. New matching sweaters. Same damn smiles. And this time, they included someone new, Rachel's boyfriend Dan, who I had never met, who had been to 2 family dinners, and who stood right in the center holding the family dog like he'd been part of the bloodline since birth. I wasn't just excluded anymore. I had been replaced. And that was the moment I stopped second-guessing anything at all. There was something perversely satisfying about how quiet the morning of December 20th felt that year, not the comforting kind of quiet you get after a fresh snowfall or when a favorite song ends in perfect stillness, but the kind of silence that crackles with tension, like the moment before a storm breaks or the held breath before an apology that never comes. I woke early, not because I had somewhere to be, I hadn't been invited anywhere in years, but because I knew what I'd done was about to land like a stone dropped in still water, and I wanted to be awake to feel every single ripple. The ad was scheduled to run in the Christmas Day edition of the Henderson Chronicle, the same paper that had proudly published photos of Heather's Christmas cookie contest wins, Paul's appointment to the Rotary Club board, and their eldest son's high school lacrosse victory 2 springs ago, the same damn paper they had always treated like their personal family bulletin board. So it felt only fair, no, it felt essential, that it was now the medium through which I reminded them, in the most polite, beautiful, unmistakably pointed way, that I still existed. I had prepared for it in the way people prepare for difficult things, not with confidence or flair, but with a quiet, methodical sort of anxiety. I had bought 2 copies of the paper from the gas station just down the road, one to keep for myself and one to send anonymously to the cousin in Charlotte who always knew more than she let on. I made a pot of coffee that I let sit too long on the burner, burning just enough to smell like memory. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingertips on the folded front page, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that strange electricity of control, not power, not revenge exactly, but something close to agency. The knowledge that I had done something no one could ignore, even if they pretended to. The ad itself was elegant, as planned, no passive aggression, no guilt-tripping, no manipulation dressed up in holiday platitudes. Just my face, composed and steady, wrapped in the warmth of a red sweater they all should have recognized, holding a box that suggested more than it revealed, and underneath, the line I had agonized over, rewritten a dozen times, and finally decided to leave exactly as it was the first time it came to me. Turns out, I was the gift. By noon, I had 3 missed calls and 1 text, not from Paul or Heather, of course, but from cousin Rachel, who apparently didn't appreciate seeing me in the same section of the paper as their carefully curated family announcement. Her message came without preamble. "What the hell, Maggie?" No greeting, no context, just 5 words packed with panic and the simmering rage of someone who suddenly realized the story had a chapter they hadn't authored. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had said everything I needed to say without ever opening my mouth. When Paul finally called, which surprised me more than I'd care to admit, it was past 4 in the afternoon, and I was sitting on the couch with a glass of mediocre boxed wine, watching reruns of a baking competition I didn't care about, just to fill the air. The phone buzzed and I let it ring, because power, real power, sometimes looks like letting them sweat. When I finally picked up, I didn't say anything, just waited. He opened with a clipped, controlled voice, the kind he used in high school when he was trying to get out of trouble without admitting to anything. "Maggie, what was that supposed to be?" I said nothing for a beat longer than polite, then answered, as evenly as I could, "It was a Christmas message, Paul. Like the ones you send every year." He laughed, that sharp, defensive exhale people use when they're thrown off balance, but don't want to show it. "You embarrassed us," he said, like that was the worst possible thing I could have done. "Do you even understand what kind of scene this caused?" Heather's parents saw it. Our pastor saw it. The kids, they were upset. I stared out the window as he spoke, watching a neighbor's dog sniff around the base of a mailbox, and replied, with a calmness that surprised even me, "I gave you what you always wanted, a version of Christmas where I wasn't part of your world. I just happened to print it." He didn't have a response for that, not immediately at least. When he did speak again, his tone had shifted, not softer, but meaner, clipped, and resentful. "You've always made things harder than they needed to be, you know that? Always had to make everything about you." I almost laughed, because the irony of being accused of selfishness after being ignored for half a decade was so rich it could have been served with a ribbon. But instead, I let his words settle between us like dust and then said, "I didn't make myself disappear, Paul. You did that all on your own. All I did was point it out." He hung up shortly after, muttering something about how he hoped I was proud of myself, as if pride was what I was after. It wasn't. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was acknowledgement. Not applause, not a parade, not some forced holiday pity, just the simple human confirmation that I had mattered enough to be missed. And if I couldn't have that, then I would take visibility, even if it made them squirm. But perhaps the strangest moment came not from Paul or Rachel or any of the others who spent the day calling each other in a flurry of family chaos trying to contain the narrative, but from Emily, my niece, who hadn't spoken to me directly in over 2 years. She texted me just before midnight. A quiet message. No judgment. No outrage. Just a single line. "I always missed you. I didn't know they were doing this to you. Can we talk?" And that was the only moment that day when I felt something close to sadness, because it reminded me that for all the righteous satisfaction of being seen, there were still parts of me, soft, tired, lonely parts, that just wanted to be understood. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know how. Because now that I had blown the door wide open, the question wasn't would they let me back in, the question was did I even want to walk through it again? When I finally answered Emily's message 2 days after Christmas, sometime between cleaning out my refrigerator and taking down a wreath I hadn't really wanted to hang in the first place, I did so not with excitement or hope, but with a cautious neutrality. The kind of emotional restraint you build up over years of learning that even the most well-meaning people can twist kindness into a prelude for disappointment. I kept the message short, direct, maybe even a little cold. Coffee works. Let me know when. She replied within minutes, suggesting Thursday at 10, a little cafe on Main that still had tablecloths and served their tea in real china cups like it was 1952. I almost said no, not because I didn't want to see her, but because some part of me, the part still bristling with the sting of being erased, didn't know how to face someone who had stood by while it happened, even if she had finally, belatedly, chosen to open her eyes. I arrived 10 minutes early, the kind of early that doesn't just say, I'm punctual, but screams I had nothing else to do today, and sat at a corner table where I could see both the entrance and the window to the street, not because I needed to feel secure, but because watching the movement of strangers had always helped me avoid the trap of spiraling into myself. Emily walked in exactly on time, bundled in one of those oversized beige coats that women in their 20s wear like armor, her hair pulled back tight, no makeup, no pretense, just the face of a girl I had once carried on my hip through the aisles of a toy store, who used to call me Auntie M and insist I make up bedtime stories on the spot. Seeing her now, her eyes wide with something between guilt and affection, was disarming in a way I hadn't prepared for, because beneath the years and the silence, she still looked like the little girl who once fell asleep on my shoulder during a thunderstorm and told me I smelled like cinnamon and safety. We exchanged pleasantries, stiff ones at first, the kind you use with distant relatives at funerals, and then, after the tea had arrived and we'd both stirred our cups far longer than necessary, she looked up and said, quietly but without flinching, I think they lied to me. And, just like that, the wall cracked. She told me how, for years, she had been fed a version of events in which I was the one who pulled away, the one who made things difficult, who didn't show up, who caused tension, who was off in ways no one could quite explain. She said she believed them, not because she had any reason to doubt me, but because when you're surrounded by people who speak with confidence and wear their version of reality like a uniform, it feels safer to agree than to dig deeper. She told me that as she got older, she started noticing the inconsistencies, the way stories didn't add up, the way my name was avoided in certain conversations, the way photos were mysteriously missing from digital albums that she remembered me being part of. And then, without ceremony, she reached into her bag and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years, a dusty old scrapbook, the kind my mother used to make obsessively, before her fingers grew too stiff with arthritis and her mind too clouded by painkillers. Emily said she found it in a box labeled keepsakes, do not throw away, while helping her parents clean out the attic. She placed it on the table between us like an offering, a sacred object unearthed from the past, and when I opened it, my throat tightened. There I was, page after page, photo after photo, holding Emily as a baby, helping decorate Christmas cookies, dancing in the backyard with sparklers on the 4th of July, sitting beside Mom on the porch with a smile that didn't look forced or tired or bitter, but genuinely full. My name was written beneath each image in Mom's neat, deliberate handwriting, Maggie and Emily, summer '98. Maggie and Mom, Christmas morning. Maggie's birthday, strawberry pie with whipped cream. It hit me all at once, the realization that my mother had done what no one else had bothered to. She had kept the proof, the evidence of my presence, the quiet record of my inclusion. She had preserved me in the story long before anyone tried to erase me from it. And, for a moment, the grief of her absence folded into something else, something like gratitude, something like vindication, something that almost felt like love. I closed the book slowly, afraid that if I moved too quickly, I'd shatter whatever fragile bridge had begun to form between Emily and me. She looked at me then, really looked, and said, I don't know if I can ever forgive them for making me believe you didn't care. And I replied, with more weight in my voice than I intended, I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for letting it happen as long as I did. Because the truth was, I had let the silence fester. I had accepted the crumbs they offered, convinced myself for too many years that being tolerated was close enough to being loved, and in doing so, I had become complicit in my own disappearance. We sat in silence for a while after that, not the brittle kind, but the kind that comes after something real has been said. Before we parted, Emily hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for reminding them." I nodded, not sure whether to smile or cry, and told her to keep the scrapbook safe. She promised she would. In the weeks that followed, no one else from the family reached out. No apologies came. No letters. No invitations. It was as if, by daring to reclaim my presence, I had confirmed for them what they had long suspected, that I was not willing to play the part of the quiet, grateful outsider anymore. And maybe that made things simpler for them. Maybe it allowed them to move on with their curated holidays and polished group photos without the burden of my contradictions. Or maybe, deep down, they knew that even if they never said it aloud, even if they never admitted it around their dinner tables or within the safe echo chambers of their social circles, they had been seen. The illusion had cracked. I think about that odd sometimes. About how something so simple, a photo, a sentence, could shift the air in a room I wasn't even standing in. I think about my mother's scrapbook and how love sometimes looks like glue and paper and 1,000 tiny decisions to say, "You belong." I think about Emily and how it's not always the loudest voices that carry the truth, but the ones that find their way to you slowly, after the noise has died down. And I think about what it means to matter. Because maybe I was the gift, after all, not the kind you unwrap with excitement and pass around the room, but the kind you leave under the tree year after year, unnoticed and gathering dust, until one day someone opens it and realizes it was what they needed all along. Funny thing is, no one sent a family card since.